All right. So, what are some extra legal factors that might affect how you are sentenced? Well, these are demographic factors that are associated ultimately with criminal sanctions, and consideration of such variables would be direction in reference to violation of a constitutional due process and equal protection, as well as other federal statutes. First one, of course, is social class. The lower the social class, the lower the social class of the offender, the harsher the sentence. The classic example is whether one is found with crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. The sentences for the possession of crack cocaine are tend to be much higher than the sentences associated with powder cocaine, and that's referenced to social class. Education may play a role in whether a sentence is imposed, but not necessarily the length of the sentence. Gender, of course, male offenders tend to receive harsher sentences than female offenders. Age, older offenders sometimes receive harsher sentences than younger offenders. But other times judges show leniency because they think the elderly pose less risk to society. Race, of course, a pervasive feature of sentencing, especially in reference to racial and ethnic minorities. They tend to receive harsher sentences. Male and racial or ethnic backgrounds, and you can expect extremely harsh sentencing. And then some other victim characteristics. Sentencing may be reduced when victims have negative personal characteristics or qualities, and we need to take into consideration a victim impact statement, where a post-conviction statement by the victim of the crime may be used to guide sentencing decisions somewhere down the line. Capital punishment. Approximately 15,000 confirmed executions have been carried out under civil authority since 1608. In recent years, it has been limited to first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. And no issue is more controversial or emotional in reference to the doling out of punishments. Capital punishment is it's got its supporters and it's got its detractors. When we think about capital punishment, especially in reference to the United States in the past 50 some odd years, it peaked out in 1998, and it's steadily been on the decline since then. There are some primary arguments for the death penalty. The first, of course, is deterrence. Executions do, in fact, deter the executed person from committing another crime, and the question is whether the threat of execution deters future crimes committed by others. I think that by not showing the execution, and I'm not morbid, but by not showing the execution, this idea of deterring future crimes might not be as impactful. It's morally correct. There's a moral foundation in the Bible, and proponents argue that execution provides the victims with justice. Generally proportional to the crime, putting a person to death for killing another crime or another seems proportionate to the crime committed. It reflects public opinion. The death penalty has strong public support, and that public approval rests on the belief that the death penalty is an important instrument of social control, It can deter crime and is less costly than maintaining a murderer in prison for life. And there's an unlikely chance of error. Given the automatic appeal and extensive post-conviction work, it is not very likely that an innocent person will be executed. Not impossible, but not as likely as TV would like us to think. Arguments against the death penalty. Well, of course, the possibility of error. Although it's rare, it is possible for an innocent person to be executed, and you can't bring that back. There's an argument for weak public support. In recent years especially, public support for the death penalty is on the decline. And furthermore, people who support the death penalty generally may not want it to be used on juveniles. They may not want it to be used on the mentally challenged or the mentally ill. Once again, it's not a whole lot of evidence that it's a deterrent in the way that we think. Another problem is when we factor in race, gender, and other biases, we really run into some problems. The research suggests that offenders from minority groups are more likely to receive the death penalty. This is especially true if the victim is not a member of a minority group. Men overwhelmingly receive the death penalty, yet it's quite rare for women. Ultimately, there's an argument that it causes more crime than it deters. Some experts believe that the possibility of a death sentence may make an offender more violent and more likely to assault the police officers trying to apprehend him. Cruel and inhumane is another way to argue against the death penalty. And most developed countries have abandoned it. More than half of the countries in the world have abolished the death penalty. Since 1995, more than 45 countries have abolished the death penalty. And even countries not known for their civil liberties, like China, have moved away from capital punishment for certain crimes. Of course, it's expensive. And some research suggests that it costs more to execute a person in legal appeals, litigation, and security than to keep them in prison until the expiration of their natural life. And of course, it's morally wrong. Some believe the death penalty is brutal and demeaning. It violates theological teachings. And according to Franklin Zimring, it is the cause of the obsession with the death penalty. Some legal issues to take in consideration when we're thinking of capital punishment. Furman versus Georgia. Here, the Supreme Court ruled that discretionary imposition of the death penalty is cruel and unusual under the 8th and 14th Amendments. We can think about Gregg versus Georgia as well. Here, the court ruled on the constitutionality of the death penalty, especially in 5 states. It allowed the imposition of the death penalty if one aggravating issue was proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The ruling in this case signaled the return of capital punishment as a sentencing option. It had been on the wane, and now it's back on the wax. And the court has made rulings that place significant limitations on how the death penalty is used. In Ring versus Arizona, the court found that juries, not judges, must make the critical finding that sends convicted killers to death row. And ultimately, the court has made other legal restrictions over the years in reference to this as well. And this last Exhibit 9.1 just gives you an idea of all of the important cases that have been ruled on in reference to the death penalty over the years. Take a look at them, be familiar with them, and yeah, we'll get back to this here real quick.